are educated and entertained sometimes at the same time. We know your time is limited, and this is not a full-time job for any of us. We just do it, a number of hours a month to make sure we meet, the expectations of each position. We have elections coming up in November. October were our nominations, and then we'll vote on those in November, okay? But it's about giving back. So we would encourage you to, come up to one of the board members and offer your services. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be on the board, okay? But maybe you come up and say, you know what, I could do this for the group, or I could help you find some speakers for next year, or, I've been involved with this situation and I'd like to maybe get up and talk about it. I don't know, there's so many things, with real estate investing. You don't learn all this in 1 week, you don't learn it in a month, you don't learn it in a year, and you don't learn it strictly out of a book, okay? We have a lot of seasoned people in this group, and especially for the beginners, you can talk to those people. That's how I learned. And, like I had to do my first eviction probably in 20 years this past week. So my wife and I are doing something right. We're not perfect, but we got a significant amount of properties over the years, and we have very few evictions. And the reason we don't have any evictions is because we've learned from the other people in this group. So when you're on that board and you're sitting around on a board meeting or whatever, you can call another board member and say, hey, I've had this problem, what do you do? And that's how we've learned, and we've helped each other out. So again, if you want to advance your career with real estate investing, and whether you're a beginner or you're a seasoned investor, there's a place for you in our group. We need your help, okay? Again, I think we're the only non-for-profit group around. We're just here to help you, but, please give back because we could use your help. Just come up to one of the board members, myself or Amber. There's other ones here at the tables. After the meeting, say, yeah, I'd be willing to help in some way or form. That doesn't mean you need to be president or vice president or even a director on the board. You could still help out. There's so many things you can do because we want to keep this group viable and going. So again, thank you very much, and look forward to hearing from some of you.
So we are going to get started with haves and wants. Actually, before we get started, I want to just mention a disclaimer. So do your own due diligence in any and all dealings that you may either find tonight or find from other people as a result of tonight. Just make sure you do your research. Just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. And now we will get started with haves and wants. So is there anyone out there who wants to discuss their business, or if you have a property, or if you're looking for a property, now would be the time to have that conversation. Go ahead. Do we have a second mic by chance? Oh, he's got one.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hey, good evening, folks. My name is Justin Bowling. I'm new. I'm a guest of Kristen and Heath Lubman. I apologize if I pronounced that correctly. But I pour concrete for a living, and I've grown up with my father. He's owned his own construction company for 50 plus years, so I've grown up in the industry. I don't like to brag, but I am very knowledgeable in what makes concrete fail and how to fix that. Pardon me. I do need some help with the real estate legality side of things. So if there's anybody out there that could point me in the right direction of how to own your LLCs or how to own your real estate. Right now it's all personally owned, and I know that's kind of a dangerous thing. So I appreciate y'all's time. Good to meet everybody. Justin Bowling.
How do we contact you?
Yes, my phone number is 314-941-7842.
You have business cards to hand out.
Yes, and I do have business cards to hand out, so please, I would love to shake y'all's hand. Thank you so much.
All right, any other haves, wants?
Hi, my name is Charles Bruce. I'm in private lending. If you need the juice, call Dr. Bruce. And 636-346-8639.
Thank you.
Good money to you, I work in the bank.
If you need some juice, call the Bruce. Got it. Anyone else, what they have or want? Any real estate out there anyone's looking to get rid of? No? All right, let's get started with our speaker for tonight. So I am very pleased we are very pleased tonight to have Eric Oliver and Chris Howard from Cost Segregation Authority. They are the leading experts on tax saving strategies for real estate investors. They're specializing in, as just mentioned, cost segregation. They help property owners maximize tax benefits by accelerating depreciation deductions, resulting in substantial tax savings and improving your cash flow. So I don't know about you all, but I'm excited for this conversation, especially so I can set myself up for 2025. So come on aboard.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you, John, for inviting us to be here tonight. As Amber mentioned, my name is Eric Oliver. My partner in crime back there in the cost seg shirt is Chris Howard. If you guys have questions, we'll be staying around after to answer any questions. We'll be sure to get you guys a copy of the slides as well, so don't feel like you frantically have to take notes. I was talking to Chris, some of these slides might be too small for some of you guys in the back, so I'll try to go over the numbers the best I can as we get going here. Is that louder? All right. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, thank you guys for being here. Not often you guys come out on a Tuesday night to talk tax. There's not a lot of people there's a lot of other things you could be doing besides talking tax on a Tuesday night. So we'll try and make it quick. We'll try and give you some valuable information. This is the good side of tax where you can save tax. We're not going to show you how to pay tax. Hopefully we're going to show you how to save tax. There's really two concepts we want to go over today. The first one I'm just going to go over quickly because it's something you should be aware of. I don't know how many of you it'll pertain to. So we've just got a little bit of information on 45L. Has anyone heard of 45L? The tax credit? Doesn't look like, okay. So we'll talk about what it is and how you qualify. Give you a little information there, but I think the bulk of the information that's going to be most valuable to you guys will be on the cost segregation side. How many of you guys have heard of cost segregation or maybe even done cost segregation? Oh, good, quite a few of you. So, all right, so 45L, what is it? So 45L is a tax credit for the construction of energy efficient residential units. So remember, the government uses the tax code to incentivize us, the American public, to do what they want. And so they want homes that are energy efficient. Therefore, if you build homes or residential units that are energy efficient, the government will give you up to a $5,000 credit per dwelling unit. So a dwelling unit, according to the IRS, you gotta have a place to eat, sleep, prepare food, and use the restroom. And that's considered a dwelling unit. So whether you are building single-family homes, multi-family, senior centers, student housing, anywhere where somebody lives may be eligible for some of these credits. So what we're looking at when determining whether you are eligible for these credits, we're looking at a few factors. We're looking at the building envelope. That's the exterior walls of the building, the insulation of the walls, the attic, etc. We're looking at the HVAC, or the heating and air, and then we're also looking at the lighting. Those are the three big components. There's a lot of other components that go into this modeling, but basically we're trying to determine how energy efficient those units are. And if those units are energy efficient, then you're eligible for that credit. You do have to have a third party come in and verify that, and then you're able to take that credit on your tax return. Now remember, this is a credit, this is not a deduction, so credit comes right off the top of your tax bill. So these are very powerful credits if in fact you are building any residential units. Now for those of you guys who are buying residential units and maybe you're going in and renovating those units, you may qualify. It's a little bit harder to qualify for renovation projects on this 45L program because you basically have to take the units down to the studs. So if you're going in and putting in some new appliances, maybe painting some cabinets, putting in some new floors, they're not gonna qualify for these credits. But if you're going in and you're taking it down to the studs, you're putting in new insulation, new sheetrock, new heating and air, maybe some new lighting, then in fact you may be able to qualify for anywhere from $500 per unit up to $5,000 per unit. So, not sure how many that pertains to you guys, but just wanted to make you aware that that program is out there. It's one of the most underutilized tax credits that I'm aware of in real estate. The government used to allow this program to expire quite often, and so tax preparers don't ever know if this program is on or off. And I think that's why a lot of times it just goes underutilized. So keep that in mind. Yes, questions? Federal tax, yes, this is not on the state level. There are other state programs, there's different types of solar programs, but this would be at the federal level, correct? Yes? Yeah, so if you've got a single family home currently, if it's not new construction, so if you've got one and you're going to go in and renovate it, you basically have to take it down to the studs. You're gonna need to put in new insulation, new windows, new heating and air, and new lights in order for it to qualify. If you're just doing one of those, it's probably not gonna qualify. So really, like I said, renovation projects are very hard to qualify. This is mainly for new construction. So a lot of builders, developers are building their homes to these specs now so that they can get those credits. They're eligible for those credits. But it is available for those of you doing renovation projects, but you've got to do some real heavy renovation, like I said, usually down to the studs where you're replacing all of that to be able to be eligible for the credit. Yeah?
If you're doing the windows, is that enough, or do you have to still take it down to the studs?
If you're doing the windows, it's probably not enough. That is one of the factors that goes into it, but if you're not replacing the insulation and you're not replacing the HVAC, so you may put in some very high efficient windows, but if you've got poor HVAC and poor insulation, it's not gonna meet the requirements, because we have to go in and look at the house as a whole and measure it against what the IRS specs tell us. They're gonna say, okay, this home needs to be 50% more energy efficient than this standard, and usually just changing out one of those pieces is not gonna make the home qualify. So again, I don't wanna get you guys' hopes up. It really is for full gut jobs. Like you've gotta go in, if you're buying a duplex and you're gonna go in and tear everything out and replace everything, it's worth looking into. But if you're going in and maybe just changing out some lighting, some appliances, it's probably not gonna qualify. Even the windows, which typically are very expensive, it's probably not gonna qualify. Question, yeah?
Yeah, so last question, sorry.
No, you're good.
So I am putting a apartment in my basement, and so it is unfurnished at this point. So I'm assuming this would possibly be something I could qualify for. Like you said, it's down to the studs.
Yeah, so if you've got an unfinished basement and you're gonna put a unit down there, it may qualify depending on the insulation you put in,
Yep.
the heating and air, and then the lighting would be, those are the three big factors. There's some other stuff that goes into it, but those would be the things you wanna look at. And just so you guys know, you can actually go to the Department of Energy's website and you can pick your location and it'll tell you, kind of gives you a checklist of what needs to go into it. It's called the Energy Star program, but if you go to the Department of Energy, search up the Energy Star program, it'll ask you to pick your climate area, and then basically put in your zip code and it'll tell you what needs to go in based on the climate area of where you're building your units or where you're improving your units. So, all right, perfect. All right, let's talk now about, any other questions on 45L before we move on? Like I said, I just wanted to make you guys aware of it because it is so underutilized and it could be a substantial credit for those of you guys who are doing renovation. Yes? Say that again? Oh, hold on, there you go.
Who can work on the property and qualify for it?
Who can work? It's whoever pays for the renovations. So like if I'm a developer and I'm building units and then I'm gonna sell them off to investors,
Yeah.
if I'm carrying the construction loan, then I'm the one eligible for those credits. I always think of it as who's making the decision on what type of windows and insulation go into the building. It's usually the person paying for it. So if you're paying for it, if you have basis in the property during construction, then you're eligible for those credits.
So let's say, for example, if I work on the property, would that qualify?
If you work on the property, yeah, do you own the property or does somebody else own the property?
If I own the property, if I work on the property.
Yeah, that's fine, it doesn't have to be, Yeah, if you work on the property, that's fine, it just has to meet certain specifications, as long as it meets those specifications, you're fine to take the credit.
So it don't have to be outside.
No,
Okay.
yep.
Thank you.
Do we have one more question? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna clarify, you're not looking for an invoice from a contract?
No, we're not looking at any invoices or anything. What we're looking at is we're gonna go in and look at the model number on the AC unit and plug that into some software. And it's gonna tell us how efficient that AC unit is. We're gonna look at some plans and see what kind of insulation is in the walls, and figure out how well that's insulated. We're gonna put that into our modeling system, and it's all that stuff gets mixed together. We're looking at things like what direction the house faces, how much square footage on the south side of the building is windows versus insulation, or excuse me, versus walls. So those are all the types of things we need to look at to determine how energy efficient a building is, or a home is. But it doesn't matter who does the work, who puts it in, how much it costs, where you get it from, none of that matters. As long as you've got it in the building and it's deemed energy efficient, you're eligible for that credit. Yes?
Once we finish it, we call you, or we have to call before start, or what?
You would need to call us before you start, because there's certain requirements the IRS requires us to do. We actually have to inspect the building to see what kind of insulation is in the walls. Unfortunately, we can't just take your word for it. I believe you to be an honest man, but I can't just take your word for it. The IRS says I need to actually document that I saw that there was a certain quality of insulation in those walls before you put up the drywall. Yeah, so you'd want to call us before, because there's actually 2 inspections throughout the process. All right, so let's talk about cost segregation now. So cost segregation is really just accelerated depreciation on your real estate assets. So one of the benefits of owning real estate is the ability to take depreciation on those assets. So normally residential units get depreciated over 27.5 years. So just to make the math easy, let's say you have a home, you go buy a home for, let's say, $325,000. You always have to back out your land value. Land is non-depreciable. You don't get to depreciate the land. So if you buy it for $325,000, and let's say the land is worth $50,000, you now have $275,000 of what we call depreciable basis. You take that $275,000, you divide it over 27.5 years, and you're going to get essentially a $10,000 write-off every year against your income for the next 27.5 years. That's called straight line depreciation. A lot of you are probably doing that now. Residential units get depreciated over 27.5. Commercial units get depreciated over 39 years. That's called straight line depreciation. It's just 1/27th of a deduction every year for the next 27.5 years, which is great. That's why a lot of us get into real estate, is for some of the tax breaks. But I'm not going to own my property for 27.5 years, and I want my deductions now versus letting the IRS hold on to these deductions. And so how can I accelerate those deductions? And the way we do that is through an engineering-based study where we come in and we segregate or break apart the different parts of your building. So when you buy a single-family home, you're not just buying the land and the walls, you're also buying some appliances. You're buying some cabinets, you're buying some countertops, you're buying some flooring, you're buying some concrete out in the driveway. You're buying an irrigation system, a retaining wall, a fence. All those things I mentioned, the IRS says they don't last 27.5 years. They last either 5, 7, or 15 years. So why do we depreciate them over 27.5 years? Well, we buy our property, we give our closing statement to our tax preparer that says, hey, I bought this property for $350,000. Your tax preparer has no idea what kind of appliances are in your building. They don't know how much carpet's in your building. Even if they did know how much carpet's in your building, they don't know the value of that carpet in relation to what your purchase price was. And that's what we do as a cost segregation company, just as the name implies. We come in and segregate that cost into those different asset classes, those different buckets. So usually we segregate around 30%. So if you have a $300,000 home, we're going to find about $100,000 worth of assets that shouldn't be depreciated over 27.5 years, but should be depreciated over 5, 7, or 15. And when we do that, we're front-loading your depreciation, and we're taking a much bigger write-off in the early years. So how do we determine what can be segregated? So there's kind of 3 tests that the IRS has given us to determine what is a short life asset. The first test is if the property can be removed without damage to the building or structure. So if I'm in this room here, I can take these lights, these sconces on the walls, I can remove those without damaging the building or structure. This LVP here, I can remove this flooring without damage to the building or structure. That's the first test. The second test is if the relationship between the asset and the equipment or machinery is so close they'd be retired at the same time. I'll give you an example of this. There's a projector right here. So that projector is a 5-year asset. But not only is the projector a 5-year asset, there's cables going from that projector all the way back to the circuit breaker. Those cables are specific for that projector. The only reason you've got power going from the circuit breaker to the middle of the ceiling here is specific for that projector. Therefore, we can associate that electrical work with that piece of equipment, and it all becomes a 5-year asset then. So think about your single-family homes. You've got plugs for your washers, your dryers, your range hoods, your ceiling fans. You've got plumbing for your washer. You've got plumbing for your garbage disposal. You've got electrical for your garbage disposal. Sometimes as much as 50% of the electrical work going into a home is specific for short life assets. So we can put a value to that electrical work and depreciate it over a much shorter life. And then the third test is if the relationship between the asset and the nature of the business are unique. I'll give you an example there. Does anyone know what a meadery is? A place that produces mead? I should start there. Does anyone know what mead is? What is mead? There's always one drinker in the room. Congratulations, you got it right. They're usually in the back too. They're never the ones sitting in the front, I've noticed. But yes, mead is fermented honey. So they take honey, they ferment it, they make kind of a beer, wine out of it. We were called to do a meadery in Phoenix, Arizona. And as you can imagine, a meadery is a place where they produce mead. So we go to Phoenix, Arizona. Of course, we go in August when it's 120 degrees in Arizona. We go in this warehouse and they have these 50-gallon drums of honey. Well, they've got this air conditioning that keeps the honey at a certain temperature. Because if the honey gets too hot, it's hard to work with. If it gets too cold, it's too thick and it's hard to work with. The air conditioner in those warehouses isn't to keep mead cool, it's to keep the honey cool. And so we were able to associate that HVAC equipment with their business, and we were able to call that equipment and depreciate it over a much shorter life than, let's say, the HVAC that was in the office portion of that building. So those are kind of the 3 tests we're looking at when we're trying to determine if something is a short life asset. Here's some examples of short life assets. Over there on the, I guess that would be your right-hand side. Carpet, countertops, cabinetry, blinds, parts of the lighting, parts of the plumbing, window treatments, wall coverings. Those are all 5- and 7-year assets. Your 15-year assets, that middle category, those are all your land improvements. Things like curbs, gutters, asphalt, storm drains, irrigation systems, retaining walls. Trees, bushes, and shrubs is kind of an interesting one. If I was doing a cost-sake study on this building, I would be outside counting all the trees, bushes, and shrubs, putting a value to those trees, bushes, and shrubs, and depreciating them over 15 years versus 39 years in this example because it's a commercial building. And then everything over here on the left-hand side, those are all your real-life property. Things like steel structure, roof, walls, doors. That's all your 27.5 or 39 year. So remember, I said we usually segregate around 30% into those shorter asset lives. So we find 30% that falls in that 5, 7, or 15-year bucket. The remaining 70% is the cost of your walls, roofs, doors, windows, etc. So gives you an idea of kind of what we're looking for. So that's cost segregation kind of at a high level. That's basic cost segregation. You know, by raise of hands, you guys showed that a lot of you have probably done cost segregation on some of your properties, or you at least heard of it. There's some additional benefits to cost segregation that I wanted to talk about. One is bonus depreciation. How many of you have heard of bonus depreciation? One of you? Okay, perfect. So we'll talk about what that is and why that's so important. It basically puts cost segregation on steroids. Next, we'll talk about catch-up depreciation. That's the ability to do cost segregation on assets that have already been placed in service. So let's say you've owned a building for 5 years, you never did a cost seg study. You can actually go back and do a cost seg study on that building today without having to amend your prior year's tax returns and take those deductions, all that missed depreciation, drop it on your current tax return without having to amend. We'll walk through an example of that. The reduction of recapture on sale. When you sell an asset, you pay two types of tax. You pay capital gains tax and you pay depreciation recapture. And depreciation recapture is calculated based on how much depreciation you've taken. So I'm sitting here saying, hey, let's front load this and let's take all this depreciation up front. Some tax preparers will come back and say, Eric, if we take all this depreciation up front, when I go sell it in 5 years, I'm just gonna have a big tax bill and I'm gonna have to pay it back. And that's not necessarily the case, and I'll show you why. There's some rate arbitrage where we're taking our deduction at a high rate and paying it back at a capital gains rate of 20% and saving the spread. And I'll give you an example where I think it'll make a little more sense. And then if we have time, we'll talk about partial asset dispositions and 179. So let's look at a case study. This is a case study on a smaller retail building. The purchase price was, just for the building, not the land, was $1.3 million. It was bought in 2023. The tax year was 2023. We went in, we identified the short-term assets, things like carpet, flooring, shelving, the retaining wall, parts of the electrical. And here's what we came up with. Now these numbers are going to be small here. Let me see if I can get this. Actually, I think I can get it to work here. I'll get this pointer to work here so I can show you guys. But basically, over here on the left-hand side, there we go. This is your depreciation without cost segregation. So if you take that $1.3 million purchase price, if you divide that by 39 years in this case, you are getting a $33,000 write-off every year for the next 39 years. That's standard straight line depreciation without doing your cost seg. When you do a cost segregation study, we take that 1.3 million and we break it up into these 5, 7, and 15-year buckets. So in this example, we found $145,000 worth of 5-year assets, $13,000 worth of 7-year assets, $251,000 worth of 15-year assets, and the remaining $940,000 stayed in that long-term bucket. And remember, I said 30%. In this case, we actually found 31%. But what it does is we now get to take this $145,000 of 5-year assets and split it up over 5 years. There's actually 6 years here because we bought it in the middle of the year, so we have a half year on the front and a half year on the back end. So you'll actually see 6 years, but the idea is instead of splitting this 145 up over 39 years, we're now breaking it up over 5 years. Our 7-year assets get broken up over 7 years, 15-year assets over 15 years. Here's what it does to our depreciation numbers. In year 1, which was only a partial year of ownership, I'm now getting a $56,000 deduction versus an $18,000 deduction. In year 2, which is my first full year of ownership, I'm getting a $97,000 deduction versus a $33,000 deduction. Now remember, deductions come off of our taxable income. So if I make $156,000 a year, instead of being taxed on $156,000, I have a $56,000 deduction, and so now I'm only taxed on $100,000 of income. In this example, we're increasing depreciation over the first 5 years by $194,000, and that's creating a $68,000 tax savings. Now that's on a $1.3 million retail strip mall, but if you're doing this on a $300,000 or $400,000 single family home, you can save $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in taxes with some of the tax laws now. We'll talk about bonus depreciation here in a minute. Any questions on that, how that works? Again, that's kind of straight cost segregation at a high level. No questions? Perfect. I think we're going to get into, I don't have this one. We're going to get into bonus depreciation right now, I believe, yes. So we call it super bonus. I don't know that that's a technical term. Don't go to the IRS website and search up super bonus. You're not going to find it. But basically, back in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for those of you who don't remember, Donald Trump was our president at the time. Donald Trump owns real estate, and Donald Trump revised the tax code. So it was very favorable to real estate investors. At the time, in order to take bonus depreciation has been around for a number of years. The government uses bonus depreciation to essentially stimulate the economy. So when the economy's doing well, they'll decrease the bonus. When it's not doing well, they'll increase the bonus. And what bonus is, it's just being able to take extra deductions at a faster rate. So there's some rules that go along with bonus. One is the asset has to have a useful life of 20 years or less. So if I go buy a bulldozer for $1 million, and that bulldozer has a useful life of 20 years or less, and bonus is at 50%, I would get a $500,000 write-off, or 50% of my $1 million I get to write off in the first year as an expense. The other 50% gets spread out over the useful life of that bulldozer. So I've met with some tax preparers, they're like, Eric, bonus depreciation doesn't apply to real estate because real estate is 27 and a half years or 39 years. So how can you take bonus on real estate? And I said, well, let me show you. We have this thing called cost segregation where we segregate it into 5, 7, and 15-year buckets. And now all of a sudden, those 5, 7, and 15-year assets are eligible for bonus. Bonus depreciation in 2017 was at 50%, and it had to be on brand new equipment. You couldn't go buy a used bulldozer. You had to go buy a brand new bulldozer right off the showroom floor. I don't know if there's showroom floors for bulldozers. I imagine there is. I'm not in construction, but I imagine there is. You go buy a bulldozer right off the showroom floor. You pay $1 million for it. You get 50% of that as a deduction in the first year. Two things changed with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. One is bonus depreciation went from 50% to 100%. So any assets placed into service between 9/27 of 17 and 12/31 of 2022 are eligible for 100% bonus. That's important. That's a big deal. You'll see that bonus starts to phase out here. In 2023, it went to 80%. 2024, it's 60. 2025, it's 40, and then it eventually phases out 20% each year until 2027 when it's down to 0. That's the current tax law. There is a bill, well, there was a bill in front of Congress. It passed the House unanimously, bipartisan support, almost unanimously, had bipartisan support, and that bill was to extend the 100% bonus from the end of 2022 through the end of 2026. It passed the House, it got to the Senate. There was a few senators that said, hey, wait a minute, we're in the middle of an election year, a presidential election. If we pass this, it's gonna look good on Biden's watch, and we don't want that to happen, so they kind of shot the bill down. What's gonna happen, in my opinion, this is not fact, this is just my opinion. After this presidential election here in November, Congress is gonna get back together. They're gonna put together a comprehensive tax bill. Everyone in Washington owns real estate. They all want bonus depreciation. They're not gonna tell you that. The Democrats have the child tax credit. The Republicans have this bonus depreciation. They're gonna say, we'll give you the child tax credit. You give us the bonus. It's great that those two things are married together and expire at the same time because they just both agree. But my guess is before we file our taxes next April, a bill will be passed that 100% bonus will go into effect for anything bought in 2024 through 2026. But we'll have to wait and see. This is the current bonus depreciation schedule. So back to the two things that changed. Bonus went from 50% to 100%. More importantly, they added 5 words to the tax code. My guess is the folks in Congress didn't even know those 5 words were added to the tax code when they voted for it, but it made all the difference in the world. Remember, it had to be brand new equipment. You had to buy a brand new bulldozer. They added the words new to you, the taxpayer. I think that's actually 6 words. So now what does that mean? I go buy a used bulldozer. It's new to me, the taxpayer, and now all of a sudden I'm eligible for bonus. All right, so I don't know how many of you invest in bulldozers, but let's talk about real estate. What does this do to real estate? Now I don't have to go build a brand new building. I can go buy an apartment building or a single family home that was built in 1980. It's new to me, the taxpayer, and I'm eligible for bonus. And not only am I eligible for bonus, I'm eligible for 100% bonus.
That's not a bad idea.
This was like the best thing that could happen to us CASE guys, because now you guys have to pay us to get a study if you want to use bonus, right? Because remember, when you go buy that home, it's a 27 and a half year asset. Can you take bonus on a 27.5-year asset? No. You need someone like us to come in and say, here's your 5-year assets in that building, your 7-year assets, and your 15-year assets, and now all of a sudden you can take 100% bonus. And going back to what I said originally, remember, we segregate 30%. So if you buy a $300,000 home, we find $100,000 that can go into those 5, 7, and 15-year buckets. And if you get 100% of that 100,000, you're getting a $100,000 write-off. Even if you get 80 or 60% of that, you're getting either an $80,000 or $60,000 write-off. And so you can see how bonus depreciation put cost segregation on steroids, and it makes it just that much more powerful. Here's that same retail strip mall, but now we're going to apply 80% bonus because it was bought in 2023. So we still have our $145,000 worth of 5-year assets, but now I'm taking 80% of that in year 1. The other 20% gets spread out over the next 4 years. I'm taking 80% of my 7-year assets and 80% of my 15-year assets, and look at my deduction now. Do you guys remember what it was on the previous slide? I think it was $59,000. My deduction now, because I'm applying bonus, is $350,000. That means I can offset $350,000 of my income and pay no tax on it. Now, there are some limitations to that I want to caution you guys all. It's not as good as it sounds. It's good, it's not that good. There's something called passive income versus active income. I am a W-2 employee for Cost Seg Authority, so if I buy this retail strip mall and I create a $350,000 deduction, I cannot use that to offset my W-2 Cost Seg Authority income. Because that's considered passive, my W-2 income is considered active, and you can't mix the two. Now I can use this $350,000 deduction to offset the $350,000 of rental income I have from my other properties. I just can't use it to offset my W-2 income. Not always. Sometimes my spouse is a stay-at-home mom. If she qualifies as a real estate professional, then all of a sudden she does real estate for a living, this deduction becomes active. Now we file a joint tax return, and it can be used to offset my W-2 income. So that's why a lot of times you'll see like high W-2 earners, doctors, lawyers, if they're fortunate enough to have their spouse stay home as a real estate professional, they buy a few properties, they cost seg them, they use that $350,000 deduction to offset their doctor income, and then they go buy another property. And they just keep doing that over and over. So real estate professional status is kind of like a golden ticket. Cost segregation is still great. You can always use these deductions to offset any and all passive income, but if you're a real estate professional, you can use it to offset active income. So, any questions on that? That's kind of an important topic. Yes, question?
What about, if you're a professional and you buy a full-size pickup truck, can't you write off the whole thing?
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'll give you the little bit that I know. So I'm actually not a CPA, I should have clarified that before. But what I do know is that yes, there are rules. You can actually take bonus depreciation on certain size vehicles. They have to be over 6,000 gross weight, something like that.
Oh, we did that.
Did you? Yeah. But it has to be used for business use. You can't be
Yeah.
using it to drive your kids to school. But if you own a construction company and you buy yourself a pickup truck and it's over a certain weight, you can take bonus depreciation and use that as a deduction.
Yeah.
So,
Good to know.
no, that is good to know. There's a lot of things you can take bonus depreciation on. Any short-term asset that's being used for business, you can actually write off a good portion of it in the early years. But yes, vehicles are eligible. Certain vehicles for certain types of business use are eligible.
And that's a biggie. So everybody should know about that
Yes.
if you are a professional.
Yep. But people go buy Ford Raptors at the end of the year because Ford Raptors weigh over a certain amount, and if you can say that you're using it for business use, then all of a sudden you get a huge write-off.
Yeah, well, you got a Ford 150.
And it met the qualifications? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, that's a good point. The other other thing I wanna make you aware of is how many of you have heard of the short-term rental loophole? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Nobody? So there is a loophole to this active versus passive income. I hate to use the word loophole because it sounds like we're doing something nefarious, but it's actually in the tax code. I'll give you a real life example. I actually did this myself. So my wife actually is not a stay-at-home mom. She's in the school system. She's not a real estate professional. I'm obviously not a real estate professional. But we had a tax liability at the end of 2022, so we owed money in taxes. I went and bought a short-term rental. I have a long-term rental. If I do a cost-sake study on that long-term rental, I can only use those deductions to offset passive income. I needed deductions to offset my active income. So I went and bought a short-term rental at the end of 2022. I was strategic about it. I bought it in November. Now, short-term rentals get treated differently than long-term rentals. Does anyone know why? Think about how you're using it. A short-term rental is more like a hotel. It's being used on a transient basis. So as long as the average stay in my Airbnb is less than 7 days, I get to treat that as a 39-year commercial property. Even though it's in a residential neighborhood, it's a commercial asset. Because the average stay is less than 7 days, and because I manage it myself, I basically am a hotel operator. That's what I do. Because I'm a hotel operator, and I actively manage that property, those deductions when I did my cost-sake study on that property are considered active deductions, and they can be used to offset my active income. There's 7 tests to show that you materially participate in the management of that property. You only have to meet one of the 7. The test that I met, and I was strategic about when I bought the place, I bought it in November. The test that I met is I spent at least 100 hours at the property or managing the property. I probably spent at least that setting the place up, getting it ready. And then I spent more time than anybody else. I was up there more than our cleaner. I was up there more than our maintenance guy. Because remember, I bought it at the end of November. So we only had 4 or 5 guests from November through the end of the year. I was up there more than our cleaner, more than our maintenance folks. Therefore, I was able to show that I materially participated in the management of that property. I did a cost-sake study. I created a $148,000 deduction, and I offset $148,000 of our W-2 income, me and my wife's. So if we're in a 30% tax bracket, 145,000 times 38, I can't do that math that quick, but it's about $45,000. And my down payment on the place was $60,000. So I put $60,000 down, I got $45,000 back the next spring when I did my taxes. Had I not done that, I would have just given the $45,000 to the government and never seen it again. But now I have a revenue generating property that hopefully will appreciate over time. To be honest with you, it's not cash flowing that much, which I knew it wouldn't. We bought it in kind of an oversaturated market, but I bought it for the tax write-off and the appreciation over time. So that's one way you can get around that active versus passive, and that's why you see a lot of high W-2 earners, doctors, for example, buying short-term rentals. They need deductions to offset. They're gonna buy them anyways as vacation homes. They might as well be getting the write-off, so then they rent them out part of the year, and they get a huge write-off, and they offset their doctor's income, and they take that $100,000 of tax savings, and they go put it down on a new property for next year. They just keep doing that and doing that and doing that. So, any questions on that? All right. All right, so let's talk about catch-up benefit. Catch-up benefit is the ability, I think I mentioned this, to do cost segregation on assets you've already placed in service, and you do them this year for this year's taxes. So let's say one of you guys you go meet with your CPA, your tax preparer, they're like, hey John, you're gonna have to write a check for $50,000 to the IRS. No one wants to hear that. But let's say you've got these 3 rental properties that you've had for the last 5 years. You've been taking your standard deduction, you never did cost segregation. You may be able to go do cost segregation on those assets now, this year, drop it on your current tax return without having to amend any prior years. So basically you're telling the IRS, hey, I've been taking my standard deduction, my 1/27th, I've now decided to accelerate my depreciation, and do cost segregation, here's the difference between my 1/27th and my accelerated number, and I want to catch that up on the current year. It's actually interesting. You have to fill out a form. It's called a 3115, and it tells the IRS that. It actually tells them, hey, I screwed up. It's actually fixing your mistake. I was depreciating my carpet over 27 and a half years, which is incorrect. Every one of you guys who's not doing cost segregation, you're probably in violation of the IRS code. Because you should be depreciating the carpet in your assets over 5 years. And if you haven't done a cost seg study, and you just have on your depreciation schedule, it says building, and everything's clumped together, and you're depreciating it over 27 and a half years, you're doing it wrong. The IRS doesn't care if you do it wrong, because it's just more money in their pockets for a longer period of time. They're not gonna come after you. But technically, when we fill out that 3115 form, we check a box that says you're going from an impermissible method of depreciation to a permissible method. Saying, hey, I screwed up, I'm fixing it, and here's the difference. And you get a huge deduction on your current tax return without having to amend. Now, these are the real small numbers, so you guys won't be able to see these, but I'll explain it to you. This is a page from one of our reports, but this is that same retail strip mall, but now it went into service in 2015. So now I've owned it for 8 years. Over those 8 years, I took, what is it? I can't even read the numbers up here. Depreciation allowed, depreciation taken. So I took, I think that says 154. I took $154,000 worth of depreciation. Oh, sorry, 218. I took $218,000 worth of depreciation. I was eligible for 417 when I did my cost seg study, and the difference between the 218 and that's actually 437, is 218,000. So I get to take this missed depreciation and put it on my current tax return, and I get to offset my income by 218,000. So again, if you're in a 30% tax bracket, that's a $60,000 tax savings. For assets that you didn't buy this year, you bought them 5 years ago. So again, if any of you meet with your tax preparers and they say, hey, you have a big tax liability and you own real estate, it may be worth looking at those properties to see, hey, can we bring some of that missed depreciation forward and drop it on our current tax return? All right, so now we're going to talk about the sell of an asset. Well, first of all, does anyone have any questions on those look-back studies, how those work? No? Perfect. All right, so let's talk about the sell of an asset. This will probably be the most complicated thing we talk about, so I'm going to keep it short, as simple as I can. When you sell an asset, when you sell one of your buildings, you pay 2 types of tax. You pay capital gains tax, and you pay depreciation recapture. And remember, depreciation recapture is calculated on how much depreciation you've taken. So again, I'm sitting here saying, hey, front load and take all these deductions up front, and CPAs will come back to me and say, Eric, but this is just a timing issue. If I take all this depreciation up front, when I sell my building in 5 years, I'm gonna have to pay it all back. And even if that were the case, you're still getting an interest-free loan from the government, essentially, but that's not actually the case. You're actually paying it back at a lower amount on a lower rate on a lesser amount and saving the spread. So if I take my deduction today, it's my ordinary income of 37%, I sell my building in 5 years, I pay it back at 25% recapture rate or a 20% capital gains rate and save the spread. And I'm not even paying it all back, I'm paying some of it back. And I'm going to back into that example because I think it makes more sense. Let's say I buy this building for $1 million. So I paid $1 million for the land, the parking lot, all the stuff in it, the projector, everything that's in this building, the flooring. Paid $1 million for it. 5 years later, I sell it for $2 million. Okay? If I don't do a cost seg study, I'm telling the government, the IRS, that everything's doubled in value. Right? I bought all this stuff for $1 million. I'm selling it all for $2 million. Well, my land and walls have gone up in value, but my dirty, nasty carpet in the hallway upstairs is not worth double what I paid for it. But when you don't do a cost seg study, you're telling them that everything is doubled in value. Remember, carpet is a 5-year asset. So in that example where I've owned the building for 5 years, what's my book value of my carpet upstairs? What's the book value? 0. It's worth 0. It's depreciated down to 0 over those 5 years. So when I sell it, why am I selling it for double what I paid for it? I should be selling it for zero. And then the gain gets pushed over to capital gains bucket, and that gets taxed at 20%. But remember, I took my deduction at 37%, paid it back at 20%, saved the spread. So this is why sometimes we work with investors who are selling their assets who have never done a cost save. So they come to me and they say, hey, I bought this building 10 years ago for $1 million. I'm selling it today for $2 million. Should we do a cost save now? They're like, it's under contract. I'm going to turn over the keys in 30 days. I need to hurry and do a cost save study. The reason is we want to go in that building, put a value to that carpet, put a value to that parking lot, so that when we sell it, we can sell that stuff for zero and create that rate arbitrage, or that difference in rates. And that can usually, it could be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the asset. Now, I will tell you, for smaller residential units, that rate arbitrage game does not work. So if you bought a home for $60,000, you're selling it 5 years later for $80,000, that rate arbitrage, you are gonna save a couple $100 if you do cost save, but you've gotta pay us $3,000 for the study, so the $200 you're gonna save in taxes isn't worth it. So I've kind of found the break-even point. If your original investment is over $500,000, then this strategy will work. But remember, that's only on sold assets. Doesn't mean you can't do cost saving on a $200,000 single-family rental that you bought. You just wouldn't do cost saving on a $200,000 single-family rental you bought 10 years ago and you're selling it this month. Does that make sense? So just keep that in mind. I don't want to. Cost segregation works on smaller assets. This rate arbitrage just doesn't work on smaller assets. It works, but you have to pay for the study, and so that rate arbitrage isn't big enough to help pay for the study, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? That's probably the most complicated thing we'll go over tonight. If you don't remember anything from that slide, don't sell your dirty, nasty carpet for more than you bought it for, and then call Chris and he'll help you walk through it. Right, Chris? So, any questions on that? All right. Oh, I forgot. Here's the actual example of that same retail. We bought it for $1.3 million. We sold it for $2 million 7 years later. You'll see my 5-year assets. Remember I had $145,000 worth of 5-year assets? When I've owned them for 7 years, they're worth zero. When all these numbers flushed out, I paid $34,000 less in taxes. If I don't do a cost seg, bought it for 1.3, sold it for $2 million, I'd have to pay $198,000 in taxes if I don't do cost seg. When I do cost seg, I pay $164,000 in taxes, which means I just saved $34,000 in taxes. So that's just an actual example. There's a lot of numbers on that slide. It took me like 3 months to figure out that slide. So again, don't worry if you don't make sense of those numbers. Just don't sell your dirty, nasty carpet for more than you bought it for. Cool? All right. This is just a summary of the case studies. I've shown you it's that same building, but now we've applied it 4 different ways. We did it without bonus, with bonus. We did it when we owned it for 7 years, and now we've done an example where we actually sold it at the end of those 7 years. In every example, we saved significant tax dollars, anywhere from $34,000 in tax savings to, let's see, 162 was the highest when we applied bonus. So it's not a matter of if you should do cost segregation. Typically, it's a matter of when you should do it. You want to do cost segregation to manage your tax brackets. So if I didn't make any income this year, let's say I've got 2 rental properties, I made no income this year, had a rough year, had very low income, should I pay to have cost segregation studies done on my 2 assets? No, because I'm already in a low tax bracket. Next year I have all these hopes and admirations I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to do my cost segregation next year when I make $500,000 because I'm going to be in that highest tax bracket. Don't do cost segregation unless you have income that you need to offset. Then here's a trick question. Does it make sense to offset your income all the way down to zero? So let's say I've got 5 properties, and let's say on each of my properties I can create a $100,000 deduction. And let's say I have $200,000 of income this year. Should I do cost segregation on all 5 of my properties? No, because you're paying for something today that you can't actually benefit from. if I create that $500,000 deduction and I have $200,000 of income, I'm gonna wipe my income out to zero. The $300,000 that's left over, it does carry forward, and I'm never gonna lose it. I'll be able to use it next year. But don't pay out of pocket this year, just pay to do 2 of the studies this year, and then next year you pay to do 2 more, and you just keep playing that game. And again, sometimes you don't even want to wipe it all the way down to zero, because now you're using your deductions to offset income that's taxed at a lower tax bracket. Just get yourself out of those 37, 35, 30% tax brackets. I'm okay paying 10% on my 30,000 of income that I show that I make, right? That's not a big deal. But I don't want to pay 37% of $200,000 of income. So use those deductions to get you in those lower tax brackets, but save some of that for next year. Don't blow through it all this year. You want to use it to manage your tax brackets. And so that's something that we can help your tax preparers walk through if you've got multiple properties. How are we doing on time, John? We good?
I'm good. Got a question?
You got a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Heidi would like to know, can I do cost segregation when I purchase the property in a 1031 exchange? The adjusted basis that got transferred to the new property was from an asset put in service in 2007.
Maybe. That's my answer to everything. You notice that's maybe. It depends. There's so many variables. It's a great question. So the answer, or the question is, if I do a 1031 exchange, can I do a cost seg study on the new property that I exchange into? Probably yes. It depends on what that adjusted basis is. So when you 1031 exchange, you're deferring your capital gains, you're deferring your recapture, and because you're doing that, your depreciable basis in the new property gets adjusted down. So let's say I buy $1 million property, the land is worth $200,000. Normally, my depreciable basis would be $800,000, purchase price minus land value. But if I 1031 exchange into that $1 million property, I have to account for the depreciation in my relinquished property. And I have to adjust my new depreciable basis by that amount. It's not actually that simple, it's a little bit tougher equation, but you're basically adjusting. The government's saying, hey, since you're gonna defer all this stuff, you don't get to start depreciating this new asset at its full value. So the answer is probably yes, but it depends on what that adjusted basis is. The reason I say that is cost segregation doesn't pencil out on assets that have a depreciable basis less than about $200,000. So if you have a $100,000 single family home you bought last year, you could do cost segregation and you're probably gonna save a couple $1,000s in taxes, but it's gonna cost you a couple $1,000s to get the study done. We wanna see at least a 7 to 10x return on your investment with us. So if we're gonna charge you $2,800 for a study, we want you to save $28,000 in taxes. And so, can you do cost segregation on assets that you bought for $60,000? Yes. But your tax savings is not going to be worth what you have to pay to get the study done, so it doesn't usually make sense. So I always tell you, my recommendation is if your depreciable basis is $200,000 or greater, let us run some numbers. Let's look at what tax bracket you're in. Let's look at what kind of income you have, and then we can make a determination on whether it makes sense. So to answer her question, if the depreciable basis or the adjusted basis is $200,000 or greater, then let's look at it, and it certainly could make sense. So, good question. Any other questions? All right, so let's talk about partial assets dispositions for a minute here. Partial asset dispositions is one of the additional benefits of doing cost seg is, now on my depreciation schedule, instead of just saying building and having everything grouped together, I now have things that, I have a line that says flooring, I have a line that says cabinets, I have a line that says roof. Now when I replace my roof 2 years after buying my property, I can pull off the depreciation schedule, the old roof, dispose of it or retire that piece of equipment, and whatever the remaining book value is, I get to write that off as an expense. And then I get to put the new roof on my depreciation schedule and start depreciating that. So again, I'm gonna back into an example and I'll show you how it's done wrong because we see it this way all the time. Let's say you buy a building for $500,000 and the land is worth $100,000. So on your depreciation schedule, you say building, 400,000, land, 100,000. And then 2 years later, you have to put a $70,000 roof on your building. So you go down to the next line, line 3, you say roof, 70,000, and you start depreciating that roof with that new in-service date. Well, now I'm depreciating 2 roofs at the same time, because my old roof is stuck in that line item that says building. When I bought that first building, there was a roof there, and so it's just all grouped together. So now I'm depreciating 2 roofs at the same time, and I should only be depreciating 1. So when you do a cost seg study, you pull the old roof off the schedule because you have a value for it, pull it off the schedule, write it off as an expense and never pay recapture tax, and then start depreciating your new roof. So there's ways you can do that without a cost seg study. Your tax preparer can try and calculate the value of the old roof. It's just very difficult. So oftentimes they don't, they just leave it on there and stuck in that line that says building, and they put the new roof on, and you're now depreciating 2 buildings, and you end up paying more tax on the asset because you're depreciating too much, you're taking too much depreciation, and so you end up paying more. But that's one of the added values of doing cost seg, is the ability to take these partial asset dispositions. Couple questions on cost seg. What types of buildings are worth looking at? Any revenue generating property with a depreciable basis over $200,000 is worth us running the numbers. Doesn't mean it's always going to make sense depending on your income levels, depending on your active versus passive. There's other factors that we want to look at, but anything over $200,000 is worth us running our free initial analysis. We'll give you an idea of what the tax savings could look like if you meet these certain qualifications, and then we can decide if it makes sense. What is the cost of these studies? These studies range anywhere from about $2,800 for single-family rentals up to $28,000 for large office complexes with multiple buildings or ski resorts or golf courses, those types of things. So I know that's a wide range. Our pricing is basically dictated on square footage, the type of asset, and the size of the lot. Those are kind of the 3 big factors that go into our pricing model. You know, a big empty warehouse is a lot easier for us to do than a large apartment complex or a large strip mall where we have to get into 9 different tenant spaces and do all the calculations. So depends on the type of asset, the size of the asset, but you can count on anywhere from about $2,800 on up, depending on the asset for the cost. Kind of the process, the IRS requires us to do a site visit, so once you engage us to do the study, we'll always do a free analysis. We don't ever want to engage somebody unless they're going to save significant tax dollars. Once we've done that analysis, once we've talked to your tax preparer, we've determined you're going to save money, the IRS requires us to do a site visit, so we'll do that site visit either in person or we can do it virtually. That's one of the great things that came out of COVID. We used to send our engineers all over the country, but now we just send them out on the larger projects. The smaller projects we can do virtually using a video conferencing app. Certain things we need to see at the property to be able to do the study. Once that site visit's done, about 14 days later, we run all our numbers. Our deliverable back to you guys is a 40 to 50 page report. You're probably going to skip the first 49 pages. You're going to go to the last page, which is the revised depreciation schedule. That's where everything's broken out. You're going to give that to your tax preparer. They're going to input that into their tax software. That's how you guys are going to get that large deduction on your tax return. So that's kind of the process. Question, yeah?
So, if you have a house and someone, pays you to run the study, that's a one-time deal, and your CPA can use those values going forward from then on?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, you just do it one time per ownership. So one time for you, and then if you sell it in 5 years, the new owner can do it at that time at the new price that they paid for it. But yeah, one time per ownership of the property.
And the 200,000 is the depreciable value. So if you've done some 1031s, which we've done with a number of our properties, that makes it a little bit tougher, doesn't it?
Potentially, depends on if you're 1031 exchanging up. So if you're selling a $200,000 asset and you're going and buying a $210,000 asset, then it's probably going to be tough. If you're selling a $200,000 asset and putting that down on a $500,000 asset, all of a sudden you've got new basis into the new property, and that adds value and it gives you the ability to do cost segregation potentially.
Okay, But outright, if you're just buying a new property, and you're saying, I mean, what's the dollar value that you need to be spending? Over 200,000 for a new property?
200,000 of depreciable basis, so that's kind of a trick question, because if I spend $200,000 in Oklahoma, the land value might be 5%, or 10, let's call it 10%, because I can do that math in my head. So 10% of 200,000 is 20,000, which means my basis is 180. If I take that same 200,000 and I go buy a property in California on the water somewhere, they're gonna tell me that my land is worth 190 and my building's only worth 10. So it's not so much a matter of how much you pay for the asset, but your depreciable basis. So when you're looking at properties, again, this is strictly from a cost seg perspective. There's all kinds of other factors you've got to look at, but one of the biggest factors is your land value. So you can go to the county assessor and determine the land value, but a $500,000 spend in Oklahoma is going to get you a lot more depreciation than a $500,000 spend in California, for example. So,
Thank
yeah,
you.
you got it. Any other questions on the studies? I've got 2 more slides that will open it up for more questions. But any questions up to this point? All right. We just have 2 more slides. Oh, yes. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. There is an audit guide that tells the IRS how to audit these cost seg studies. You guys have probably heard on the news, there's been all kinds of money pumped into the IRS. They're hiring more agents, and they are looking at cost segregation studies. You want to make sure you've done an engineering-based study. And when you have that 60-page report, that is your backup documentation to be able to provide the IRS when they say, hey, how did you get to this figure of $120,000 of depreciation? You pull up your report, you say, well, here it is. You call us, we actually defend all of our studies 100%. And we will say, hey, we went and looked at the property, there's this much square footage of carpet, we value the carpet at this amount per square foot, and this is how we got to the $120,000 depreciable, or the additional depreciation. So the reason I tell you guys about the audit guide, 2 reasons. One is there is online software that will do cost segregation. It's kind of like the TurboTax in our industry. I actually think the website, well, one of the websites is doityourselfcostseg.com. And essentially you are doing it yourself. Go to their website, you plug in some information about your properties and ask questions like, does your property have tile or carpet? Does your property have appliances? You plug in that information, you hit submit, you pay them your $1,000 and it spits out a report. Those reports are done on a modeling method, which is approved by the IRS as one of their preferred methods. I'll actually go to this next slide here because this is my favorite slide of the presentation. These are the preferred methods for doing cost segregation in the IRS audit guide. So again, this is what their agents look at when they audit you for cost segregation. Their methods are a detailed engineering approach from actual costs. So you build a brand new home, you've got all your contractors' receipts, we segregate those receipts, pretty straightforward. A detailed engineering approach from a cost estimate. This would be you buy an existing home, we come in, we do our engineering study, we use a cost estimate to estimate the cost of the carpet in the building. If you go down to number 6, the rule of thumb approach. And this is a quote from the audit guide. An examiner should view this approach with caution since it lacks sufficient documentation to support the allocation of project costs. This looks like a bright group here. Is number 6 preferred or not? I don't know. It's on their preferred list, but then they tell you don't do it in the same damn paragraph. This is the IRS. This is the people I work with and have to deal with every day. Same paragraph, these are our preferred methods, but don't do it this way. So, the reason they don't want you to do it this way is because it's just taking some averages. When you plug your information into that software, it just takes some averages. And what happens if you ever get audited using that method, they're going to say you need to go defend that and you're going to end up paying for a study anyways. So, it does work for your really small assets. I recommend this cost seg approach for smaller assets, but once you get over about 200,000, the other thing I've noticed, this rule of thumb approach usually gets somewhere between about 12 and 18% segregation, the ones I've seen. So remember, I told you we get 30% segregation. So on a $200,000 asset, that 10% difference in segregation that's worth $20,000 of depreciation. If you're in a 30% tax bracket, that's a $6,000 difference in tax savings. So instead of paying $1,000, pay the $3,000 and get $6,000 of extra deduction. So that's just my caution to you guys. It's not to scare you. Cost segregation does not cause audits. We've done 25,000 studies. We've been involved in just over two dozen audits. Not a single audit have we had to change our results. They want to see that you've done it the correct way. You show them our report, we've got all our measurements, we've got our pictures in there, all the backup documentation, and then they go away. But you want to make sure you've done it correctly. But don't be afraid to do cost seg, it's not going to cause an audit. With that, that's all I've got. This is Chris's information here. If you guys have any questions, please use this as a resource. It sounds like we've got a question or two. Go ahead and then I'll finish up.
Yeah, I've got a question from Deb here. If my 2022 taxes and 2023 taxes are scheduled to be done in October, can I get a cost segregation study done today and use it to reduce a lump sum retirement payout? Retirement payout was in 2022, and is the cost study tax deductible?
The cost seg study is tax deductible. It's accounting services, so you can write that off as part of your business. The answer is yes, you can probably do a cost seg study. It depends on when they bought the asset and those kind of things, but we're happy to look at it. But yes, if you haven't filed your 2023 taxes yet, and you own the properties in 2023, we still have time. It's not a lot of time. We have about a month left to be able to get a cost seg study done before you have to file on October 15th. So yeah, we still have time. That's one of the great benefits of cost seg is you don't have to do it in the year. You just have to do it in the tax filing year. We're in the tax filing year of 2023, so we can still do cost seg studies for the 2023 tax year, apply it to your 2023 return, even though we're in September of 2024. So, question, yeah.
I did have a question on the short-term rental loophole. Is there one for midterm rental?
No, unfortunately not, because the tax code says specifically, in order for it to be treated like a hotel, your average stay has to be less than 7 days. So if you have a midterm, you have to take your unique number of renters throughout the year, divided by the days they stay, and if the average is less than 7, then yes, it would qualify. If it's more than 7, then no, it gets treated as a regular rental. So that's the kicker there. The average stay has to be less than 7 days. Any other questions? Well, perfect. Thank you guys. Again, this is Chris's information. You guys, please use this as a resource. We don't bill by the hour. Don't call me and ask me about child tax credits or earned business incomes. I don't know anything about that stuff. But if you have questions on depreciation or real estate tax, we're happy to help. I think the weirdest question we've been asked is, or that I've been asked, is how to depreciate mule deer at a breeding facility in Wisconsin. I didn't have the answer, but I had people in our office that could get them the answer. So, again, don't hesitate to use this as a resource, you guys. Thank you. Chris, did you have anything you want to say?
Just wanted to introduce myself. I would be your point of contact. If anybody is just curious and wants to know if this makes sense, let me know. Typically, we ask 7 or 8 questions up front. When did you buy it? What did you pay? What kind of asset is it? Did you use 1031 money? So we just collect some basic information. If you've got a depreciation schedule, if you just bought and you've got your closing statement, we'll collect that. Usually takes us a day to turn around a report, and we'll show you, kind of like that schedule Eric put up on one of the earlier slides. This property, here's what it would look like. Here's what we think we can reclassify as a 5-year, 7-year, 15-year asset. Here's the increase in depreciation we expect to create based on a typical 35% federal tax rate. Here's the tax savings you can expect. Here's the fee. So we show you everything up front. We only want to do things that make sense because, you know, our favorite clients are investors who buy multiple properties, and we have people who use us over and over and over. So if it doesn't make sense, we're going to tell you this is not a good candidate. If it is a great candidate, we're going to tell you this is something you want to do. So be reach out to me, I'll ask you some questions, give me a day, I'll get that report back to you. We'll decide together if it makes sense or not, take it to your CPA, decide if it makes sense or not, and if it is, we'd love to help you. So I have cards, if you want one, I'll pass it out to you, and be glad to meet you.
I found that it has to be rental property or you can occupy as own.
Has to be a rental property. So you can occupy it, so like we do duplexes where you live in one side and you rent out the other side. In that case, your depreciable basis gets cut in half because you're only renting half of it if it's, we usually do it on a square footage model. Single family, no, if you live in it and you don't rent it out, it's only for revenue generating properties. So, yeah, you can't take depreciation on your primary residence, unfortunately. So, any revenue generating properties, yeah.
Even, like Airbnb, would you qualify, like say I use my Airbnb as a vacation, would I qualify for the $5,000 credit? If it was
The Airbnb wouldn't qualify for the $5,000 tax credit, that's on the 45L. Could qualify for cost seg. There are some rules, and I'm not an expert on that, but I believe you can't stay in it more than 14 days a year. Once you stay in it more than 14 days a year, it gets reclassified from a rental property into a second home, and you can't do cost segregation on your second homes. But check with your CPA, because I think that's, she's nodding her head, so I think that's what. Sounds good, all right, yeah.
This might be for all, how would they know if you occupied it?
They don't know.
Okay. How would
They don't know. There's a lot of doctors out there who have second homes who do cost segregation on their rental properties, and I'll leave it at that. But, yes, you have to show something. If you ever get audited, you're gonna need to show some kind of income coming in, you're gonna wanna show an Airbnb listing, so you're gonna wanna document it, but yeah, there are people who document it after the fact. I wouldn't suggest that, but there are, but yeah. All right, perfect, thank you guys.
All right, that was very informative. I may or may not have done my taxes yet, so I may be using that. Let's see. Oh, that is it. There's nothing else here that I need to remind you guys of other than to come next month. I don't have the speaker for next month listed here, but I will say in closing remarks, just obviously we provided some dinner for you all, so please pick up after yourselves, throw things away, and looking forward to our next conversation. Have a good night.
Very good. So, get a hold of Chris. We've had a few people ask about it.
Yeah, Chris will get your information. Thank you. Yeah, that's
Well, I got his phone number.
email is just choward at cost seg, S-E-G, authority.com.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that's great.
We'll give you both. Well, I hope I have. I have them in here somewhere. They are. I actually am out of our corporate office at a solo. Yeah. Yeah, he's our local representative. Yeah, he's actually not from, he's actually from Texas. He does